the White House Chief of Staff, the person the President of the United States calls the most powerful woman in the world. It always embarrasses her, which is why I have to say it every time I introduce her. Susie Wiles, who is such a vital role of what we do in the White House every single day, such a vital role of the success of the 2024 campaign. Susie, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us here to honor Charlie here. I want to tell you a little story. You may not be aware of this story, and maybe you didn't pay attention to the social media chatter, but if I go back to probably 6 weeks after I had been selected by the president, I was the vice presidential nominee. We were campaigning hard, and there was a weird little social media campaign to try to get Susie Wiles fired from her job, and she was running the Trump campaign at the time.
More than a social media campaign.
It was a full-on campaign, and I remember talking. Charlie Kirk called me, and he said, "This thing to take down Susie is an op," meaning it's an operation meant to discredit us, meant to make us less effective. And the reason he thought it was so important to protect you is because he had such great respect for you. He thought you were such an incredible part of the team. You were sort of the person that held all the chaos together operationally in the midst of that very intense campaign. And so Charlie was thinking, as he always did, a little ahead of the curve. He was asking himself, what are the problems that are out there so I can be 2 or 3 steps ahead? And he was fighting for you, maybe even before you realized that there was this thing against you. And it was never a situation where anybody ever doubted Susie Wiles, but I wonder sometimes if the reason why you had such good and strong support from the very beginning is because you had such a powerful voice in the Republican Party standing with you every step of the way. So I just wanted to tell you that because it's one of the reasons why I admire and respect you. I know Charlie loved, admired, and respected you, but I've told my Charlie story. Maybe talk in those days of the campaign what an important part Charlie was of our efforts and our ultimately successful efforts to install the boss in the Oval Office.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for doing this.
Of course.
I have a Charlie story that maybe hasn't been told, at least not enough. In the 2024 campaign, the law changed, election law changed, and campaigns were finally allowed to coordinate with outside organizations. One of the biggest expenses in a campaign is canvassing. The door-to-door activity that, particularly in a Donald Trump campaign, is critically important. And so we were liberated. We had license to coordinate with everybody, and everybody came to the table, and everybody was going to canvass at this level with this sort of fidelity to our plan, and included Charlie. And at the end of this whole odyssey, the person that really did everything they said they were going to do and more was Turning Point. He had an army of good people who were motivated and passionate, and they delivered 110%. And I don't know that Charlie gets enough credit for that.
Friendships with fellow conservatives and Republicans, but everybody knows that because everybody saw it. What they didn't see necessarily is that Charlie was this very effective strategic operator at all levels of politics. And you know, one of the things that the president always talks about is that compared to really not just his campaign in 2016, but any Republican campaign for the past 40 years, we saw young voters shift in every county, in every demographic, white, black, rich or poor. Young voters shifted right in 2024 in this very profound way. Can you talk a little bit about what Charlie did to make that happen and why this youth movement that he really built, I mean, he was a kid when he started Turning Point USA, how this youth movement, without any of us probably being able to prophesize or predict it, ended up helping us deliver the White House in 2024?
Well, I explained the tactical benefit. We never thought again about Arizona or Pennsylvania. Charlie had it. And as for the youth vote, I mean, he evangelized. He was on every college campus in every part of the country, and he was broader than that. A Turning Point event was something you had to be at, had to pay attention to. I know President Trump felt that way, and I think you did too. And I'm struck by, you had Secretary Kennedy on just a minute ago, and Charlie was instrumental, very, in Secretary Kennedy coming to the ticket, and you too.
Yep, that's right. I know that. And that's one of the things that, you know, I'm sitting in this office here in the West Wing or White House complex, and if it weren't for Charlie Kirk, I would not be the Vice President of the United States. And I think about that a lot. I thought about that a lot over the last few days. I mean, other than the president himself, Charlie was maybe the most important person in both getting us across the finish line, but actually getting me the nomination to begin with. It was his grassroots army. It was his advocacy that I think made me a credible selection for VP in the first place. And obviously the president makes the final determination, but it takes a team. And Charlie was such an incredibly important part of that team. It's one of the reasons why I feel so indebted to him. And one of the reasons, I mean, I worry, Susie, that he is fundamentally just an irreplaceable figure. And he is. There's no way that we can replace Charlie. I mean, certainly not for Erica and the beautiful kids. They're never going to get back what the assassin's gun took away from them. But the movement has to figure out a way of continuing and continuing to build on what he built and continuing to go to college campuses and talk to young people. And not just that, but when we won power, Charlie was a critical part of getting us the right people, of staffing. So talk a little bit about that, because other than the President of the United States, the Chief of Staff is probably the most important person in the transition, picking cabinet secretaries, picking all these important staffers. Talk about why Charlie mattered so much, and not just helping us get there, but helping us succeed now that we're here.
I think he worked in transition every day.
He did.
In one place or another, doing one thing or another. And so very much the Trump administration has his imprint. My worry about Turning Point, and I couldn't agree with you more, it has to be bigger and better and growing all the time, is one of Charlie's gifts was not talking at you, but engaging you where you were.
That's right.
And it's hard sometimes. You know tough things are coming at you. He never shrunk from that. So whoever, I can't say takes Charlie's place because that will be nobody, but whoever comes in to be sort of a voice of Turning Point, they need to be somebody that's willing to engage at a level where you're not talking to the followers, you're talking to the people that are not, and engaging them where they are. That's going to be the hardest thing, I think, to replace.
I really agree with that, Susie, and I've talked to a lot of the Turning Point staff, and what they tell me is operationally, organizationally, Charlie had built a machine. I mean, some of these people have been working with Charlie since he was literally a teenager, and he trusted them. Where I think he is genuinely irreplaceable is, for lack of a better word, on the talent side of it, right? How do you find a person who goes into these places, who takes very difficult questions, sometimes very hostile questions, and to your point, is actually engaging with them, is not talking at them. Now, there are all these social media clips, and I was talking about this earlier, so forgive the audience, forgive me for repeating myself, but he was not just the super viral clips of him getting the better of a person in a debate. If you sit down and watch a Charlie Kirk event at one of these universities, it is 90% him almost acting like a big brother to these kids, right? If it's a young conservative who's very nervous about the crowd and nervous about asking a question, Charlie steps up and says, don't be nervous. I was nervous at one point. Just speak slowly, get your question out. He would coach them through it. If there was a young progressive who is getting jeered by some of the people in the audience, he'd say, no, guys, let her speak. Let him speak. This is part of open debate, is they get to hear from us and we get to hear from them. And I thought that was just such an incredible thing that he did. I mean, I've talked to a number of friends. I've talked to, Tucker. I've talked to Laura Ingraham. I've talked to a number of people about how we can try to replace that part of it. Not in the way that Charlie did it. Charlie is irreplaceable. But we can at least have a team of people try to step into the gap and make sure that we're carrying this message to college campus. Because if we don't do that, I think that's the way in which I worry about the assassin winning, is we've got to carry on the mantle, we've got to carry on the torch, and we've got to do it by continuing the message, that's why I'm doing this show today, is I just wanted to send a signal that we're not going to let Charlie's mantle be discarded. We're going to keep on carrying it. And one final thing that I wanted to talk about is, you mentioned Bobby Kennedy earlier, and obviously he was on the segment before you. What Charlie was so good at was marshaling political action into a policy outcome. Or a person outcome. And this is where I want to talk about Bobby. And so many of the really good nominees that we had, they weren't easy to get across the finish line. And that's no insult to our great nominees. Great people are actually always going to be a little bit harder. If it's a person who doesn't make any controversy, who doesn't say anything especially controversial, that person's going to be easy. But the president didn't want that. He wanted to staff the administration with people who had interesting things to say, who brought unique perspectives, and that meant that we were going to have some tough confirmation fights. Maybe, we've got about 2 minutes left. Talk a little bit about the role that Charlie played on the inside, on the outside, and making sure that all of these great nominations that we had actually got across the finish line in a town where we've got 53 GOP senators and we could only lose 3 for any particular nomination.
Well, I would say you and Charlie were a good tag team.
We were.
Let's take Bobby or Pete, for example.
Yep.
The president really didn't want a homogenized cabinet. He wanted different people that were, for whatever reason, a part of a movement that we need to keep. There were interest groups, there were coalitions and people that came to be Trump voters. We don't have an exact number, but it was certainly more than a few. And now we have 3.5 years to convert Trump voters to being Republicans.
Sure.
So that in 2028, we can keep the White House, the House, and the Senate. That's what Charlie helped us think through. I'll speak for myself. That's what Charlie helped me think through. Yes, his expertise was with young people, but he knew so much about everything. And he knew that there was this group of people we now call MAHA that were out there looking
Yes.
for a home. He found Bobby and introduced Bobby into our world. And now he's the Secretary of HHS. So that's the kind of thinking that we saw Charlie all the time do. And I think that the movement cannot be, or he cannot be replaced by any one person. He's got to be replaced by you, by Don Trump, by so many others that are good communicators and can be taking as well as giving.